I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor at Gold Derby, here with Oscar-winning documentary filmmaker, actor, producer Fisher Stevens, who's now Emmy nominated for documentary directing for the four-part Netflix series Beckham. First of all, Fisher, congratulations on all the Emmy success so far. That's very exciting.
Thank you. I've lost 6 Emmys in a row, so maybe my luck will change.
I hope so. I hope seventh time's a charm.
Okay. Okay.
Nominate, you can only hope, but that being said, it's such an achievement these days. There's so much amazing TV, and to have this great Beckham series nominated and recognized in this way is terribly exciting. So I'm very, very happy for you and the team.
Thank you.
Um, so when I spoke to your producing mate, John Batzek, he said that you sought his advice about whether you should direct the series, like who is Beckham, why should you care? Talk us through that whole process and what it was that clinched it for you. Like you were like, yes, I'm doing this.
Yeah, well, basically, no, I was not convinced, and Batsick actually didn't convince me, by the way. Let's clear that up first and foremost. I asked Batsick to join me because I had already kind of figured I should do it. But originally, when I was approached, I didn't know much about David Beckham. I was a Liverpool supporter. I didn't start following the Premier League till 2003, the year he actually went to Real Madrid. I only kind of knew him from LA Galaxy, and like I didn't even know how great he was. And I was approached originally by Leonardo DiCaprio's people called me, Jen, his producing partner. David had sought Leo's advice, and Leo suggested me. I was on my way to work on Succession, and Succession is run by a British gentleman named Jesse Armstrong, and the director is Mark Mylod, who's British, and the other producer, Tony Roach. They're all Brits. And I asked their advice. I'm like, was he really that good? And by the way, I will preface it by saying we talk football all the time on Succession. Um, and I love the Premier League. And they were like, "Is David Beckham any good? Are you crazy? He was one of the greats. He was fantastic." And I tell them I got this call, and they're like, "You have to do it." And I'm like, "Really? Isn't he just Brand Beckham?" And they're like, "No, mate. No, 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 no." And then they just put up 10 best goals by David Beckham on their iPhone, showed me a YouTube clip, and I was like, "Holy shit, this guy was amazing." And so then I met with David on a Zoom because it was COVID. He was very different than I expected. And then I called Batsek and said, "John, what do you think?" And he's like, "You have to do it, and I'm going to be your producer." And I'm like, "Well, yes, if I do it, you're my producer. I'd love you to be my producer." David already had another producer, Nicola Housen, that was
Yeah.
attached. And then yeah, and then I was like very different experience than I could have ever imagined.
Mate, I can only imagine. And the thing is, when a series, when all the creative team, they must be hitting their stride when a series is just working. And these four episodes, I watched it in one day. And then, as I mentioned to John, I spent the rest of the afternoon texting and calling friends and family and imploring them to watch it, even if you don't even care about David Beckham, because it's so well made. And for me, it was such an emotional journey because of nostalgia, because of how much I revere Beckham, and also just because it's a really interesting story. And so, on
Yeah.
that note, I'm wondering how much work you did to ensure that you struck the right balance. You didn't want it to be an expose, you didn't want it to be in a hagiography. And so that's actually a really difficult thing to do, to make sure that you strike the right balance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want it to be either of those things. I think what was working in my favor and what was smart about David to think of me was that I didn't come in with any judgment. I just was like learning about him. And then I realized the best way to do this is to be learning about him and make me the audience and just be like, okay, be genuinely curious, try to get a rapport with the guy, not kiss his ass, but at the same time, try to get him to open up. Because I'd seen a number of interviews with him where he was very kind of curated. And I told him, like, this is not gonna be Brand Beckham, and this is not gonna be curated. And he wanted that. So that was the approach. His story is much more interesting than I could have imagined, or that I think hopefully the audience imagined. And the tricky part was also like, how do we unfold his childhood? How do we let it unfold and not make it a hagiography? And thank God I had brilliant Michael Hart by my side, and Billy Shepard, who was my story editor and producer, who really helped me kind of try to make it different and also make David just feel like a normal, like humanize him, which he is. I mean, hopefully you'll get to interview him. He's a good dude. He's kind of shockingly nice, shockingly polite, and had a very good upbringing. And I think that shows in the movie. That's kind of who he is. He's also a guy that's not used to expressing his emotions, never went to therapy, and that was challenging, right? Because I had to kind of keep pressing him for certain answers, or at least to try to discover certain emotions and feelings about a certain period in his life, whatever
Mm,
that period may be. And I had to keep hitting him with with questions a few times because he wasn't used to like
mm.
self-reflection.
That's what I was really wondering. Like, did it take you very long to establish the rapport with him and with Victoria? And did anything surprise you when he finally started to open up? Because that is actually a really important skill for a documentarian to just get the right to get that right rapport so that you can actually get to the nuggets and get to those really gold truths.
Well, with David, I immediately felt a good rapport with him. That wasn't the issue, but it took a lot. Yeah, I would say like I re-interviewed him a few times about certain subjects. I redid certain things again because I felt like he could go deeper and jar his memory. I mean, the reason that we did those eye directs often was also because, first of all, I wanted him to be vulnerable and just be open and the world to just see into his eyes. But also I wanted to jar memories and see how that would, what that would bring up with him and the other subjects. Victoria was very different. So I spent a little bit of time with David before I started filming just to get to know him. I didn't really spend time with Victoria much. We had one meal, but she was just like ready to go. Like she was just wonderful in terms of just like I'd ask her a question and she would just answer it. I'd ask her a question, she would just answer it and answer it like full out. Just almost like she'd been waiting to talk about this relationship with someone that I guess David told her that she should open up to me. um,
Yeah.
to hear her side of the story because the story was very different. And actually, in my research about Victoria, I became quite sympathetic to her in watching the evolution of the two of them and their relationship. I became sympathetic because the press were just brutal on her as well, like brutal, and especially when they moved to Madrid. I mean, so I had a lot of empathy and compassion for her, and I let her know that, and she let it rip, man. I interviewed her 4 times. I mean, I was even worried about asking her, but she was like, okay. I mean, look, she's a busy woman. The scheduling of all this was a nightmare, but she was really cool. But I didn't feel like I ever had to drag things out as opposed with David. I had, I'd ask, no, sometimes, we'd go through things a few times.
Um, the one thing that I've always wanted to ask you ever since I've seen the show is you've just kind of alluded to it is this beautiful stylized way of capturing emotion through David's eyes when or anyone that is watching the footage on a screen and we are just here. I haven't seen a lot of that before, and I could be wrong, but I feel like this is something that you can really own. It made the show electric. It brought tears to my eyes. It gave me goosebumps, and I felt like I was in the room. And I just really wanted to thank you for giving us that perspective that I was not expecting. It really, really works with this show. Can you talk me through where that idea came from and how much you enjoyed giving the audience that viewpoint through his eyes?
Well, I think it came from, well, there were, to be honest, there's two different motives that I had with that. The first motive was the first. I mean, I kind of wanted to show him stuff originally, but I wasn't sure how to do it. But the first day of shooting, he's like, mate, I really like being shot from my left, So put the camera on the left if you don't mind, and he he'd like literally come from working out. He never wore makeup. He's such a good looking dude, but he would just go, I just like this side because I have a little scar here, I'm like, all right, if you feel comfortable. And then I was like, oh, I got it. So then I thought, okay, so this is a great way to get right in there and he won't even really know it because I'm going to hit him right between the eyes. And you realize you don't see David film that much like that anymore, right? Right. And but the other thing was when I would started asking him questions before we started shooting, he would go, I can't, like he would remember games. The guy remembers every freaking game. It's crazy. But you ask him about other things or certain people, sometimes he'd know. But so I thought, okay, so this is a great double whammy. I'm going to get right into his eyes. And I'm going to ask him uh, about things and then show him things. And those things I knew would trigger other emotions. And once I did it with him, I thought I'm going to do it with Eric Cantona. I'm going to do it with Gary Neville. We never used Gary Neville's, which are great. But I used a bunch of other, Roberto Carlos and Ronaldo, and because it's just also these athletes are so polished. And the other reason I wanted to do it with athletes was like this: you can't stick it up. You got to just be in the moment there, and you get the essence of the human. So it's a long-winded answer, but I had a lot of different motives for it.
It's like for me, it was just a real insight into who these people are without having to utter a single word. When you're watching Ronaldo, watch the footage, for example, and you see the eyes twinkle, or you see in David's eyes starting to glaze over with tears. I can't imagine a better way for us to not only understand who these people are, but also for people who maybe are not really football fans, but someone like myself, football is everything and it's so emotional. And you just captured it perfectly. So I just really feel like you really stuck the landing. You should be super proud of the way that all turned out.
Thank you. So I have a funny story to tell. So I'm shooting my next movie, which I can't tell you about yet, but you'll know soon. And I had to shoot it again in Manchester, England. And I sit down on the plane and I hear this voice next to me. The pilot comes out of the plane to start talking to the guy next to me. And I hear the voice and he's talking about Aberdeen and Manchester United. And Sir Alex is sitting right next to me on the plane, going to New York. And I say, Sir Alex, it's Fisher. I directed the Beckham thing, and he goes, Hugo, Succession, yeah, yeah, because he loves Succession. Anyway, I got to chat with Sir Alex for 3 hours coming home
Oh,
yesterday, and it was heaven, heaven. We talked about Neville with David, everything. We talked about his horses, talked about wine, talked about the season, about how the team's gonna. It was such a miracle. I was just like, I am so lucky. Thank you, thank you. And it was just magical, magical.
wow. Speaking
Yeah.
of Sir Alex, it's that whole storyline about Man United that I was obviously familiar with, but I didn't really understand how broken it made David and how he's probably still not really recuperated from that whole experience. What did you think of that?
Well, I knew that was a key to the whole movie, right? I mean, the movie was about fathers and sons and families, right? Because David is a dad, but the other dad is Sir Alex. And David's discipline, David's work ethic, David's manners
Yeah.
are from his mom and from Sir Alex, right? Like Sir Alex trained these guys. I mean, we talked about it yesterday on the plane. Like we got back into it. And and the way that it ended crushed, crushed David. And he still tells me like that's the hardest thing for him to watch. is that moment. And still, you're right, it still hurts, right? And the guy is still just so important to him. Really, like, so we were supposed to do the interviews in chronological order, and I showed up one day to interview him about his early life or something, and I said, "Hey, we're gonna interview Sir Alex." He's agreed, and then that whole interview turned into, that was the emotional stuff with I never thought I'd leave, all that stuff. That just was from knowing that I was about to interview Sir Alex. And yeah, he still to this day means the world, the world, the world to him. And he's still, yeah, it's incredible. It's still open. I said, dude, you got to go to therapy, man. He goes, well, you are my therapy, but yeah.
That's it. You are now the counselor and director. Well, which probably happens quite a bit in that industry, in the documentary industry. Gee, I wish I was on that plane to hear that conversation. I tell you what, that's something that you got to do that.
Mhm.
That viral moment when David teases Victoria about her working class upbringing was so funny, and it's really an entree for a lot of people who would not have seen this series and then seen that and thought, okay, well maybe I will watch it. It looks like it's going to be something candid and fun. What were you thinking when you captured that moment?
Well, I was furious first, right? Because I mean, I've said this in interviews, but I was like, what the fuck is he doing here? I mean, the whole point was to do this interview when David wasn't home, and he was like watching the monitor. And then he was just like pissed off, I think, at her because she wasn't being honest. And my cameraman Damian Drake, who did that scene, he just knew exactly he just got him. I mean, the good thing is I don't ever use tripods. The bad thing for my camera operators is that I don't use tripods, but the good news is I don't use tripods. So he just nailed it. And then you don't see me who then has to go and tell him to leave. But I was kind of excited that Damien got it, and that I knew we were going to use it, but I was still pissed off because I wanted her to feel free. And then she got a little clammed up, and then I said, he's gone now, really.
Yeah.
She's like, really? I'm like, yeah. But it worked out really well. I know.
It made me love them even more. Honestly, it was perfect. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time. I have two very quick non-Beckham questions for you. Number one, about 15 years ago, you won an Oscar. I rewatched the footage of you winning. You bounded down the aisle. You high-fived Woody Harrelson. You got up on stage, gave a great, exuberant speech, and then, of course, unfortunately, director Louis Sihoyes was cut off. But when you think back, what's it
Well,
like to win an
can
Oscar?
we wait, but can we clarify the record here for what really happened? Because
Yeah, tell me.
I got shit for it. And actually, like, to be honest, like, people were mad at me for speaking but what the truth was is the head of the Oscars at the time, Tom, God rest his soul, he was the head of Fox. He made it, winners had 60 seconds to make a speech. So Louis and I rehearsed. My speech is 24 seconds. Rick O'Berry came up behind us and unfurled a sign, and no one was allowed to do that. The Oscars freaked out and they played the music, and Louis never got a speech. That wasn't my fault. That was Rick O'Berry's fault. And then all these people gave me shit. Like, I win an Oscar, it should be a great night. And they're like, well, you should let the director speak. He was about to speak, and Rick O'Berry, you know, free the dolphins, does a sign. They get nervous. So anyway, it was great. Woody's been an old friend of mine. I've known him forever. It was so cool, But anyway, I just want to clarify that it wasn't like I was guarding the goddamn stage.
I thought it
We
was a great moment for you, and for the team. I mean, it was just off the cuff. I mean, maybe you rehearsed the timing, but I love watching people just happily floating up to that stage.
thank you. Well, we
It's
were
a
happy.
pinnacle. Yeah,
Nice.
you were damn happy. And about the amazing comms director Hugo Baker. Geez, and by the way, I really miss Succession, but that's another story.
So do I.
What is the
So do
funniest
I.
thing that ever happened to you on the Succession set, if you can remember? What was that one thing that always makes you laugh?
Um, well, unfortunately, it's a scene that never saw the light of day. and I understand why. But I had a scene when we find out that that Brian Cox's character is dead. That episode 3,
Hmm.
um, Logan Roy. Um, there was a scene that Jesse wrote with Greg and I. Um, Nick Braun is 6'5.5",
It's
maybe.
huge.
I'm lucky on a good day. I'm almost 5'8", and he writes a scene where Hugo thinks that Nick's girlfriend, some idiot he brings to the wedding, because it's during the wedding, has leaked the story that Logan is dead. And I have this scene with Nick that I got to do that we couldn't get through. That's not why it was cut, but it was so funny, and Nick was so funny, and it was probably one of the greatest moments I've had on this show. I had a lot of great moments, but we couldn't get through the scene. And then Jesse's like, "Okay, just do one any way you want." And I fucking lit him up, looking up, and he looked down on me and he just kind of pats me on the head and walks away. It was like one of the great moments I've had on that show. We had a lot of great moments. I mean, God, man, it's like going to work. It's like going to work with with Olympiads every day, you know?
I know,
So that
right?
was a great pleasure. I know we all miss it, but we all text all the time, and
Really.
not
Yeah,
always.
I mean, it was my number one show, and I've interviewed pretty much everyone from the show, and I just miss having the conversations about that level of writing. And yeah, anyway, we can just rewatch it if we want.
Yeah, they're
Mate,
amazing.
I can't remember if you were at the Emmys earlier this year, but I remember Nick walking past me on the red carpet, and I was like, "Yeah, damn, you are big." Shit,
Yeah. No, he's the best. I mean, we all miss each other, and we're all in touch, and we're all like constant. We're figuring out, try to do work to support Kamala Harris and Tim Waltz, and see, so we're plotting how we can do things together, political things, and
beautiful.
so we'll
That's
see.
beautiful. There's so much to look forward to on the political scene. We'll see what happens in November. But in the meantime, Fisher, thank you so much for your insights today. Congrats on the nomination. I hope you win. And also, most importantly, congrats on this really beautiful piece of work. It really meant a lot to me and a lot of people who loved it.
Oh, thank you very much, and hopefully you'll beat David soon.